In every archive, there is a silence that means neglect, and another silence that means someone paid dearly to keep it. Elara Wyn had built her life on knowing the difference. She could read a careless gap in a tax ledger, a forged date in a marriage settlement, a trembling hesitation in the hand of a clerk who had copied a lie because the family paid better than the truth. But the ledger waiting beneath Veyr House was not careless. It had been hidden inside a cabinet of black oak, under 3 locks, below a floor no modern plan admitted existed. Its leather was the color of old wine. Its brass hinges were cold enough to frost the fingertips. At midnight, with no hand upon it, the cover opened. 6 names had once been written on the first page. 6 women, each given a line, a date, and a place in the household record. Now each line had been scraped until the paper thinned to a pale wound. Only the pressure of the pen remained, a ghost of handwriting visible when the page tilted toward candlelight. Beside those missing names was a signature, Elara Wyn. The same signature appeared lower on the page, then lower again, dated decades apart. The ink changed. The hand did not. When Elara would later see that page, she would not call it a haunting first. She would call it evidence. That was the first mistake Veyr House made with her. It thought fear. 3 days before she entered Veyr House, Elara Wyn sat in her own office above a closed watchmaker's shop, reading the commission letter by a lamp with a green glass shade. Her office was narrow, practical, and clean enough to be trusted by damaged paper. Flat files lined one wall, cotton gloves dried on a rack. A kettle hissed beside a stack of deeds that had outlived 4 owners and 3 lawsuits. The letter from the Veyr estate was expensive without being generous. Heavy cream paper, black ink, no scent, no personal signature. It requested restoration and cataloging of a private family archive damaged by coastal damp, deferred maintenance, and time. Elara paused over that phrase. Families loved blaming time. Time did not scrape names from parish registers. Time did not remove daughters from wills. Time did not seal portraits behind velvet and call it preservation. She turned to the contract. The offered fee was large. The conditions were insulting. Limited room access. No independent copying. No removal of documents from the house. No suspension clause if she discovered suspected fraud. Elara took out a pencil, crossed through half the terms, and wrote her own in the margins with the clean severity of a surgeon. Full access to all archival spaces. Independent conservation log. Digital and physical backup copies of unstable records. Right to notify legal authorities if the archive contained evidence of concealment, coercion, fraud, or wrongful dispossession. If they want a decorator for their ghosts, they can hire someone cheaper. She signed nothing. Not yet. The Veyr Commission had arrived through Haywick and Morrow, a law firm that occupied 3 gray floors near the old courts and kept its archive room colder than its reception. Elara met Mr. Morrow beneath shelves of probate boxes, whose labels had faded to the color of bone. He was a tidy man, with a nervous mouth. He praised her reputation. He mentioned delicate family circumstances. He avoided the word heir until Elara placed the amended contract on the table between them. The person hiring me will sign directly. Not an agent, not a family office, not an executor with a sealed instruction. The estate is somewhat particular. Archives usually are. That is why I prefer them to people. He tried a smile and failed. When he read her access clause, his thumb moved to cover the line about suspected fraud. Elara noticed. She always noticed where hands went when words became inconvenient. You understand that the Veyr materials are private. Privacy is not immunity. A clock ticked too loudly in the wall. Mr. Morrow's gaze flicked toward the narrow window, where afternoon was already thinning into rain. At last, from a locked drawer, he removed a second envelope. Inside was her amended contract, already signed in dark ink by Cassian Veyr. Elara studied the signature. It was elegant, old-fashioned, and too steady for a man who had just surrendered control over his family's secrets. Tell Mr. Veyr I arrive on Thursday. Mr. Morrow looked almost sorry for her. Elara found that interesting and not persuasive.
The train north emptied by degrees, leaving Elara with a suitcase, 2 locked document cases, and a view of wet fields unrolling toward the coast. She spent the journey reviewing what little the public record admitted about Veyr House. Old family, older debts, a private chapel, shipping money that appeared in the 17th century and never quite explained itself. Marriages recorded with precision, births recorded with hesitation, deaths recorded in clusters, often around storms, often with women's names abbreviated until they became initials pressed flat under a husband's surname. At Blackmere Station, the driver waiting for her did not hold a sign. He seemed to know who she was, because no one else had stepped onto the platform with document cases chained to her wrist. His motor car smelled faintly of salt, leather, and extinguished matches.
Veyr House keeps what it is owed.
Then it will have to learn accounting. He glanced at her in the mirror, unsure whether to laugh. Beyond the glass, the road narrowed between hedges, black with rain. Boundary stones rose from the earth at intervals, half swallowed by moss. On the third stone, Elara saw marks beneath the lichen. Not dates. Initials.
She asked the driver to stop. He protested that the tide road flooded after dark. Elara had already opened her case, taken out her camera, and stepped into the rain. Under the lichen were the letters I.V., M.E., L.A., S.H., A.R., H.V. 6 sets, 6 women, though Elara did not yet know their names. The house was naming its witnesses before she had even crossed the gate. Veyr House stood where the land lost patience with itself and fell toward the sea. Its towers were not tall, but they were numerous, clustered like dark thoughts under a sky bruised with evening. The oldest wing leaned into the cliff wind. The newer additions had tried for elegance and achieved vigilance. Every window seemed either shuttered, watching, or ashamed. Elara stepped from the motor car and let the first impression pass over her without surrendering to it. Beauty was not evidence. Grandeur was often only a more expensive form of misdirection. She photographed the gate pillars, the crest, the rusted chain through a side entrance, the stone threshold worn into a shallow groove by generations of feet. Above the main door, a carved motto had been damaged by salt. Only the last words remained legible:
kept in blood. The driver carried her suitcase no farther than the steps. He set it down, touched 2 fingers to his cap, and retreated with the brisk reverence people reserved for churches, courts, and houses with reputations for keeping score. Elara took out her field notebook. Under arrival conditions, she wrote, heavy rain, low tide, visible threshold marks, exterior seals unbroken, driver unwilling to enter.
Then she added one private line beneath the professional one. House behaves like a witness that has not decided whether to testify. The door opened before she knocked. Warm lamplight spilled across the wet stone, and with it came a man in black, his face too pale for the living world and too controlled for the dead one. Cassian Veyr looked at her as though he had expected her for a century and feared she had arrived on time. The front hall of Veyr House rose around Elara in carved shadow. Antlers, portraits, tarnished mirrors, and a chandelier that held unlit candles because electric bulbs would have seemed too honest. Rain tapped at the high windows. Somewhere deep in the house, a lock turned, without visible cause. Cassian Veyr did not pretend not to hear it. That was the first thing Elara noticed in his favor. The second was that when he saw the wet sleeve of her coat, he extended a hand, then stopped before touching her.
May I take that?
It was a small courtesy. In a house like this, small courtesies had to be weighed carefully. Elara removed the coat herself and handed it to him by the collar.
You signed my amended terms.
I did.
All archival spaces, independent copies, immediate suspension if I find evidence of fraud.
Yes.
And no interference with my methods.
A faint expression crossed his face. Not amusement, not irritation. Recognition, perhaps, of a door closing before he had touched it.
No interference.
His voice was low enough to soften the hard edges of the hall. It did not soften Elara. She had heard beautiful voices lie. Still, she felt the physical fact of him, the contained stillness, the grief held like a blade beneath velvet, the strange courtesy of a dangerous man choosing distance when closeness would have been easier. She opened her notebook.
Then show me where the archive begins.
Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, led Elara to a guest room in the east wing. She was a woman with silver threaded through dark hair, a ring of keys at her waist, and eyes that had learned the house's habits without mistaking them for laws. The room was handsome in the Veyr fashion: old blue wallpaper, carved bed, writing desk, sea-facing window, and a fireplace already laid but not lit. Elara noticed the second door at once. It had been papered over on the room side, but not hidden well enough to fool someone paid to read architecture. Where does that lead? Nowhere useful. That was not my question. A pause. Then Mrs. Vale inclined her head, almost approving. A disused dressing room. The inner latch is broken. I will have it secured from your side. Cassian had followed no farther than the corridor. When Elara turned, he stood beyond the threshold, hands folded behind his back. "I do not enter guest rooms uninvited." Elara set her document cases on the desk, tested the window catch, checked the distance to the stair, and took the key Mrs. Veyr offered. Then she added her own portable wedge under the door.
The house creaked around her, as if offended by the extra precaution. Elara slept poorly that night, but not helplessly. Her shoes remained beside the bed. Her notes remained under her pillow. Her decision to stay remained her own. The main archive reading room faced north, away from the sea glare. It should have been a conservator's dream. Long tables, sealed cases, controlled curtains, cabinets labeled by century and subject. Yet everything was too orderly, in the way of rooms arranged for inspection rather than use. Mrs. Veyr placed the official inventory before Elara. Cassian stood by the cold hearth, saying nothing. His silence had weight, but Elara did not work for silence. She worked for paper. The inventory began with correspondence, household accounts, chapel registers, estate leases, and portrait catalogs. Safe things. Polite things. The sort of documents families presented when they wished to appear old rather than guilty. Most visitors begin with letters. Most visitors are sentimental. Elara turned to property transfers. Cassian's gaze sharpened, a movement so small another person might have missed it. She did not. She laid 3 deeds side by side, then a 4th from nearly 80 years later. The ink had browned differently. The paper fibers had aged differently. But the capital V in Veyr was identical in each signature, down to the pressure break at the lower stroke. She wrote, "Handwriting continuity impossible. Require magnification, sidelighting, and comparison with parish registers." In the margin of the inventory, halfway down a column of cabinet descriptions, she found an entry that did not belong to any archival standard she knew. East cabinet, upper lock, women's weather. The room's temperature dropped. Elara looked up. Cassian looked away. By the second evening, Elara had enough evidence to stop pretending the problem was simple preservation. She worked under low lamps while rain dragged its fingers down the glass. Around her, the Veyr archive exhaled dust, salt, and the faint metallic scent of old ink. She built a comparison chart across 3 centuries. Signature, pressure, slant, spacing, terminal stroke. Alaric Veyr in 1692. Alaric Veyr in 1731. Alaric Veyr in 1804. Alaric Veyr on a document sealed after any ordinary man would have been buried, with his bones turned soft. There were explanations a poor investigator might reach for: copyist tradition, deliberate imitation, family vanity. But the surrounding hands changed correctly across time. Clerks wrote like their periods. Witnesses aged, shook, hurried, blotted. Only the Veyr signature remained perfect. Elara did not whisper. She did not call for Cassian. She opened a fresh folder, labeled it Anomalous Signatures and Potential Identity Fraud, and began photographing every page. The archive stacks answered with a slow shift of wood. A shelf that had been flush with the wall eased forward the width of a finger. Behind it, darkness waited.
Elara lifted her lamp, not enough to enter, enough to see a strip of red leather within the gap, then the silver curve of a lock. She smiled without pleasure.
There you are.
Veyr House had many secrets, but it was learning something about Elara Wyn. She did not mistake concealment for command.
The east cabinet stood beneath a painting of a winter garden. It was taller than Elara, black lacquered, and fitted with 2 locks that did not match. One was modern enough for a key. The other was a circular mechanism, engraved with tiny letters worn almost smooth by generations of reluctant hands. Women's weather. The phrase had followed Elara through breakfast, through 6 hours of cataloging, through a conversation with Cassian, in which he answered every ordinary question and evaded every useful one. She set up her camera. She documented the cabinet front, side panels, hinges, keyholes, dust pattern, and floor scratches. She did not open things blindly. Curiosity was not the opposite of caution. In her profession, curiosity without caution got evidence destroyed and people hurt. The first key turned easily. The second lock had no key. Instead, the circular letters shifted under her gloved thumb until she realized they were not alphabetic. They were initials. IV, ME, LA, SH, AR, HV. The boundary stones again. 6 hidden marks becoming a mechanism. Elara arranged the initials in the order she had photographed them outside the estate. The lock sighed open.
Inside lay no weather record, no household meteorology, no charming eccentricity of a family that had too much money and too little honesty. There were bundles of folded paper tied with red thread, each labeled only by a season. Winter contained a draft settlement. The bride's name had been scraped away. Beneath the abrasion, under sidelight, a few surviving strokes formed the beginning of a name. Isolde. Elara spoke the name because unnamed evidence remained vulnerable. Names changed the pressure in a room. Isolde Veyr. The archive answered. Frost bloomed across the inside of the window, though the fire in the hearth had been lit an hour before. Locks turned in the walls, one after another, a distant metallic cascade. The bundle of winter papers fluttered beneath Elara's hand as if someone had sighed through them. Cassian appeared at the reading room door so quickly she knew he had heard more than any ordinary man could hear. His face had gone sharp and white.
Do not move.
Elara looked from him to the papers and back again.
That sounds like an instruction.
It is a warning.
Then give it accurately.
The frost on the window thickened. A name wrote itself backward in condensation, stroke by stroke, as if an invisible finger moved on the other side of the glass. Isolde. Beneath it came a second word. Witness. Cassian took one step toward the threshold.
Do not enter.
He stopped. Hunger, fear, and something like anguish moved through his expression. But he stopped. The house did not. A drawer slammed open behind Elara. Papers spilled like startled birds. Elara kept one hand on Isolde's settlement and one hand on her notebook. Whatever else Veyr House was, it had just testified. She intended to take the statement down.
Morning at Veyr House did not make the place innocent. It merely thinned the shadows enough to show their edges. The breakfast room overlooked a strip of gray garden where salt-stunted roses leaned away from the sea. Cassian sat at the far end of the table with a cup of black coffee untouched before him. Elara brought her notebook, not her appetite. Certain rooms respond badly to disturbed records. Respond badly is what people say when they want danger to sound like inconvenience. His mouth tightened. He looked tired in daylight, the skin beneath his eyes bruised violet, his beauty less theatrical and more painful. Elara allowed herself to notice. Then she returned to the page. Was I in danger last night?
Yes.
From the house?
Yes.
From you? The room held its breath. Mrs. Veyr, pouring tea at the sideboard, did not move.
Not by my choice. That is not the same as no.
He accepted the correction with a slow lowering of his gaze. It would have been easy for Elara to soften the moment, to rescue him from the discomfort of an honest question. She did not. There were women in the archive whose names had survived only because one woman after another refused to make powerful men comfortable.
Then we will be precise. What are the rules of this house, Mr. Veyr?
Cassian told her some of them. Not all. Not enough. The chapel library had once been a devotional room. Someone had stripped the altar, left the saints, and filled the walls with books whose spines had faded into 1,000 shades of brown. The air smelled of beeswax and shut pages. Rain tapped lightly at the narrow lancet windows. Elara found Isolde's prayer book on the third shelf, not because Cassian gave it to her, but because Annika Reed's initials had been worked into the repair thread at the spine. Elara had seen the same hand in the cabinet mechanism, a bookbinder's signature disguised as ornament, an invitation from one craftswoman to another. She laid the book on a cradle and opened it with bone folders, slowly, respectfully. Not every secret needed violence to reveal itself. Some needed competence. The first pages were ordinary prayers. The middle pages had been damp once and dried too quickly. Near the back, the spine lifted by less than a millimeter. Elara adjusted the lamp, loosened one thread, and found the hidden fold. Inside was a marriage covenant, dated 1692. Isolde Veyr's name appeared in full, written in a hand firmer than the clerk's. Beneath the formal vows, in smaller script, she had added her own line. Consent given under fear is not consent. The chapel windows darkened, though the morning had not ended. Somewhere below the floor, something old shifted in its sleep. Isolde had not been a secret. She had been an author. Elara photographed the covenant, page by page, then copied the text in her own hand. The document was half marriage settlement, half spell, though no word called itself magic. That was how control preferred to dress, in legal phrasing, in property language, in careful clauses that made domination look like order. The red custody promised the Veyr heir continuance while the house remained whole. It granted command over locks, thresholds, and sealed records. It permitted blood to strengthen the heir only when given freely, presently, and with the right of refusal intact. Isolde's additions were not decorative. They were objections. She had marked each clause where Alaric's hand tried to turn a vow into ownership. In the margin, she wrote, "If he alters consent, let the house remember the alteration. If he forges permission, let the blood poison the keeper. If he hides a woman's name, let her name become a key." Elara's pulse quickened, but her hand stayed steady. She made an off-site copy using the small encrypted scanner she carried for hostile collections. The device blinked once, then sent Isolde Veyr beyond the walls that had tried to keep her. Cassian stood in the chapel doorway, unable or unwilling to cross.
"You should have told me about this. I did not know it was there." It was possible he meant it. Elara wrote possible in her notebook, not true. By evening, the storm had taken possession of the coast. Rain struck the windows so hard the West Library seemed submerged. The fire burned low, throwing amber over shelves, old maps, and the long table where Elara had spread Alosolde's covenant beside copies of the impossible signatures. Cassian entered with a lamp just as thunder rolled across the cliff. The door swung shut behind him. The lock clicked. Elara looked at the door. Cassian looked at it too, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Did you do that?" "No." "Can you undo it?" His eyes had darkened. Not black, not red, not any theatrical horror, but depthless, in the way a well is depthless after sunset. "Yes, but I need a moment." He stepped away from her, not toward her. That mattered. Not enough to settle every question, but enough to keep the room from becoming something uglier. Elara took her place near the table, where the letter opener, lamp, and door remained in sight. Cassian gripped the mantle. His knuckles whitened. Outside, lightning showed his reflection in the window. Faint and incomplete. It is worse near the records. Hunger? Yes. The word entered the room without seduction. No velvet threat. No invitation to pity. Just a fact made more dangerous by restraint. Elara's heart beat faster. She did not pretend otherwise. Courage was not the absence of pulse. It was the refusal to let pulse make the decision.
The storm pressed the library inward. Cassian kept his distance at the mantel. Elara stayed by the table. Between them lay Isolde's covenant, the anomalous signatures, and an honesty neither of them could yet afford to make beautiful. "Have you ever taken blood by force?" Cassian closed his eyes. The pause was long enough to be an answer, and not long enough to be mercy.
No.
"Have you benefited from records that made force look lawful?" He opened his eyes then.
Yes.
There it was. Not confession enough, not justice, but more truth than Veyr House had offered in centuries. Elara felt the dangerous pull of him in that moment, the pain he did not display for applause, the discipline with which he held himself apart, the ruined dignity of a man who knew he could not ask to be seen only as victim. She also felt the sharper pull of Isolde's handwriting under her gloved fingertips. Consent given under fear is not consent. My staying in this room is not consent to anything except this conversation.
I understand.
Say it plainly. He looked at her then, fully, and the longing in his face was almost painful because it did not reach for her. "You owe me nothing. Not trust, not comfort, not blood, not forgiveness." The lock opened. Neither of them moved for several seconds after it did. Maud Ellicott entered the story through arithmetic. That alone made Elara like her before she knew anything else. The estate ledgers from 1818 to 1826 had been copied in a narrow, disciplined hand. Household expenses, stable costs, chapel repairs, linen replacements, wine, coal, wages. The totals at the bottom of certain pages were wrong, but not carelessly wrong. They were wrong with intention. Elara recalculated 3 pages and found the same discrepancy hidden in different columns. £22, 6 shillings. £19, 3. £10, 12. Read as money? Nonsense. Read as deeds, witnesses. Read as a clerk's rebellion, a map. M.E. appeared only once in the official staff records. Maud Ellicott, temporary copying clerk, dismissed for inattention. Elara almost laughed. Men who benefited from women's intelligence often renamed it incompetence the moment it stopped serving them. Maud had encoded omitted daughters into the accounts. Caroline Mott, removed from a settlement. Ruth Fenn, married without dowry record. Amabel Sayer, listed as deceased while still signing receipts under a different name. Each false total pointed toward a document the Veyrs had altered. At the bottom of the last ledger, Maud had written a line so tiny Elara needed magnification. "If the house keeps the originals, the town keeps the shame." Beneath it was the reference for a solicitor's box in Blackmere. Elara sat back, anger warming the cold room better than the fire. Maud had not merely suffered the archive, she had sabotaged it with numbers.
The estate office was smaller than the archive and more revealing. Families hid sins in attics, but they hid systems in offices. Here were rent rolls, title plans, staff contracts, settlement schedules, and the practical bones of inherited power. Elara built a second evidence list. Not restoration needs, not conservation priorities, potential legal actions, missing inheritance claims, fraudulent dates, omitted witnesses, sealed medical records, disputed title transfers. The work was becoming larger than Veyr House, and that meant it was becoming real. Cassian found her there near midnight. He did not enter until she looked up and nodded. The restraint was becoming familiar, which made it more dangerous. Familiarity could be mistaken for safety if she stopped examining it.
You are no longer cataloging.
I am cataloging crimes. He flinched, not from surprise, from recognition.
Some of the people responsible are long dead.
Some of the benefits are not. The sea wind pressed against the windows. Cassian looked at the lists on her table, then at her face.
If you take this beyond the house, you will make enemies.
I already have a house trying to lock doors around me. I prefer enemies with addresses.
He almost smiled. It vanished before it became charm. Good. Elara had no use for charm where disclosure should have been. She added Maud Ellicott to the top of the witness list and underlined the name twice. The portrait corridor ran through the oldest wing, where the floor sloped subtly toward the sea and the walls smelled of damp velvet. Most of the paintings had been turned inward, their faces hidden against paneling. The official catalog called this conservation. Elara called it avoidance. She did not flip them all. She chose one at the center of the row, because the dust around its frame had been disturbed more recently than the others. The canvas was heavy. When she eased it outward, red thread snapped from the back with a soft, ugly sound. The woman in the portrait had Cassian's cheekbones and none of his surrender. Dark hair, level gaze, one hand resting on the back of a chair, as though she had risen to argue and been captured just before speech. Across her painted mouth, someone had stitched red thread in a crude X. Helena Veyr, said a brass plate half hidden beneath the frame. Wife, mother, benefactress. No birth date, no death date, no artist. Elara photographed the thread, the plate, the back of the canvas, and the nail marks where the portrait had once been removed in haste. Behind the frame, written directly on the wall, were 6 words in a woman's hand. I kept what he feared. Cassian arrived before Elara touched the wall. For once, he looked less like the master of the house than a son standing before an injury he had never learned how to approach.
My mother.
Elara did not answer softly. Softness was not always kindness.
Then why is her mouth sewn shut?
Cassian reached for the red thread, then stopped before his fingers touched the canvas. He looked as though he wanted to tear the stitches free, and feared that doing so would destroy what little of Helena remained visible.
I preserved her rooms, her letters, what I could find.
Preserved for whom? The question struck harder than accusation. Preservation was the language Cassian had used for his restraint, his secrecy, his long guardianship of things too dangerous to open. Elara knew that language. Museums used it, families used it, courts used it. Sometimes it meant care. Sometimes it meant control with better manners.
There were people who would have destroyed them.
And so you became the person who decided which truths survived. The corridor seemed to narrow. Rain ticked against the far windows. Cassian's hand lowered to his side.
I thought I was preventing worse harm.
That may be true. It may also be insufficient. He looked at her then with such naked grief that for a moment the distance between them felt smaller than breath. His hand twitched, not toward her body, but toward the air between them, toward the impossible human wish to be understood before judgment.
Elara felt the answering ache. She did not step into it. Helena's painted mouth remained sewn shut beside them.
If you want me to understand, stop choosing the order in which I am allowed to know. The almost touch died there, and rightly. Some thresholds were not romantic. Some were moral.
Mrs. Veyr found Elara on the servants' stair, with Helena's portrait photographs still warm from the portable printer. The stair was narrow, undecorated, and more honest than the grand corridors. It smelled of lemon oil, coal dust, and old work.
You ask questions like someone who expects answers.
I find expectation improves the quality of silence. That earned the faintest smile. Mrs. Veyr looked upward, toward the floors where the family portraits hung, then downward, toward the service passages that had carried more truth than any drawing room.
Lady Helena wanted the archive opened.
Elara waited. People spoke more when not crowded. She kept keys where a Veyr man would never look. Where is that? In women's work. Mrs. Veyr removed a small square of linen from her apron pocket. It looked like a cleaning cloth until Elara unfolded it. Inside, stitched in nearly invisible thread, was a pattern of dots and initials. Not a map, a cipher key. Why give me this? Because you write things down before this house can persuade you they did not happen.
Elara studied her. Mrs. Veyr was not simply loyal, frightened, or conveniently wise. She was a woman who had lived under Veyr House's habits and chosen her moment with care. Will you testify if needed? The house creaked around them. Mrs. Veyr lifted her chin. If you make a place where testimony can survive. The cabinet resisted the second opening. The initials around the circular lock had shifted, as if the house had learned the order and taken offense. Elara used Mrs. Vale's stitched cipher, matched the dots to the initials, and turned the mechanism slowly. The moment the cabinet opened, pressure struck the room. Not wind exactly, memory with force. Papers burst from the shelves in a spiral of red thread and brittle ribbon. The fire guttered. Somewhere overhead, a window cracked. Cassian entered at the edge of Elara's vision, then stopped when she raised one hand. Hold the door open. Do not touch the papers unless I ask. He obeyed. His face tightened as the room's locks began to turn against them, one after another, trying to seal the archive with both of them inside. Cassian lifted his hand toward the door. For the first time, Elara saw the house answer him. The iron latch glowed dull red. The door shuddered, then remained open. It cost him. He staggered, one hand braced against the frame, but he did not turn that power on her. He used it to keep an exit visible.
Elara moved through the falling papers, calling titles as she caught them. Settlement draft, chapel register, household death list, medical observations. The last page struck her chest and clung there as if pinned. It was signed Sabine Hale, physician. Beneath the signature, in a precise hand, were two headings: the heir's hunger and the heir's choices. At last, a doctor had entered the record.
Sabine Hale wrote like a woman who had no patience left for superstition when diagnosis would do. Her notes were dated 1864, though the paper had been hidden with records from other years. Elara spread the pages under glass weights and read until the storm outside became background. Sabine had been called to Veyr House after a young maid collapsed in the laundry passage. The official household entry called it nerves. Sabine crossed out the word in her private copy and wrote blood loss, fear, and coercive contract. She did not deny the curse. She described it. Hunger increased near forged consent records. The air weakened when true names were spoken. Blood freely given stabilized the condition, but blood taken through fear worsened both house and air. Then came the line that made Elara sit very still. The disease explains appetite. It does not explain entitlement. Elara copied the sentence twice, once for the case file, once for herself. Cassian stood across the table, not reading over her shoulder. He had the look of a man waiting for a verdict he deserved and dreaded.
Did you know these notes existed?
He did not ask which notes. That answered before his mouth did.
I knew Sabine had written something, and you did not show me. No. The room did not explode. The windows did not frost. The true breach was quieter than that. It arrived in Elara's chest as a clean, cold understanding. His restraint had been real. So had his secrecy.
Elara spent the next hour alone at her work table, because anger was useful only after it had been sharpened. She arranged Sabine's notes in chronological order. She indexed names, symptoms, rooms, and legal references. She marked every place where a medical fact had been converted into a family embarrassment. Sabine Hale had not written as an outsider dazzled by a great house. She had written as a physician, disgusted by the way wealth turned consequences into private inconvenience. She identified 3 harms: the heir's inherited hunger, the estate's legal concealment, and the household's habit of treating women's fear as proof of fragility. Her motive became clear across the pages. Sabine had wanted to separate illness from excuse. She did not deny that the Veyr heir suffered. She denied that suffering made other people available for use. Elara underlined the names Sabine had preserved: Clara Moss, laundry-maid; Beatrice Wyn, kitchen assistant; Lenora Ash, singer and witness; Helena Veyr, later correspondent. Women whose positions made them easy to dismiss, and whose records now formed the spine of the case. When Cassian's footsteps approached, Elara did not gather the pages or soften her expression. She placed Sabine's most damning paragraph on top.
Professional competence was not coldness. It was what allowed rage to become useful. Come in, and do not mistake my willingness to hear you for forgiveness. They moved to the Great Hall because the archive suddenly felt too small for the truth between them. Above the staircase, generations of Veyr men stared down from their gilt frames, all dark coats and inherited certainty. Elara chose to stand beneath Helena's shrouded portrait instead.
What else have you withheld?
Cassian's face held exhaustion, shame, and fear. None of those answered the question.
There is a lower archive.
The admission landed like a dropped blade. You hired me to restore the archive.
I hired you to find a way to open it safely.
No, you hired me under a contract that said all archival spaces. Then you decided what all meant. The portraits seemed to lean closer. Cassian did not defend himself quickly, which was something, but something was not enough.
The lower rooms are dangerous. They were built by men who wanted the house to protect their version of events.
And you preserved their version by making yourself the final door.
He looked at her then, and the longing was still there. That made it worse, not better. The story of them, whatever it might have become, had reached the place where lesser romances asked a woman to confuse vulnerability with absolution. Elara did not. Your restraint with me matters. It does not erase your control over them. Above them, the red thread across Helena's painted mouth trembled.
The door to the old wing stood at the end of a passage, where the lamps burned low without flickering. Cassian walked beside Elara, not ahead of her. It might once have looked like courtesy. Now every courtesy had to prove itself again. If you open the lower rooms unprepared, the house may close around you.
Then tell me how to prepare.
I do not know every mechanism.
Then tell me what you do know.
Silence. In that silence, the old Veyr portraits down the hall seemed almost pleased. Powerful families survived on moments when fear made decent people vague. Stop for tonight. Please. He did not command. He did not touch the lock. He did not use the house's authority against her. That was the minimum required of him. Not a grand sacrifice. Elara set her document case down and turned to face him fully. Do not ask me to treat danger as an argument for silence. Sabine did not. Maud did not. Isolde did not. I am trying to keep you alive. Then stop making me investigate around you. She opened the document case, removed the cipher cloth, the prayer book copy, and Sabine's notes. Women had prepared the way across centuries. Cassian's fear would not be the thing that turned her back. The music room had been locked with 2 ordinary keys and 1 old grief. Dust softened the piano. Sheet music filled a cabinet painted with swans. On the mantel stood a cracked porcelain figure of a woman holding a lyre, her painted eyes rubbed away by someone's thumb. Elara found Lenora Ashe in the music, not in the household wages where she should have been. A singer, engaged for a winter gathering, then retained for reasons the official records described as entertainment. The words sat on the page with the smugness of a lie. Lenora's annotations ran beneath the printed notes in a hand both elegant and furious. She had used musical notation as camouflage. A sharp meant witness present. A rest meant statement interrupted. Repeated bars marked repeated coercion. Names hid in the first letters of performance directions. Elara translated slowly. Lenora had witnessed a false consent ritual in the chapel. She had seen a woman pressured to sign a blood gift document while the Veyr heir stood behind the officiant, and the house locked every door. But Lenora had not only watched, she changed the closing melody of the ritual song. She built dissent into the sound itself, making the house remember the false note every time the ceremony was repeated. At the bottom of the final page, Lenora wrote, "When they call us entertainment, let the walls learn our tune." Elara sat at the piano. Her fingers were not trained for beauty, but they were trained for care. She played the marked notes, one by one. Behind the instrument, a panel clicked open.
The panel behind the piano revealed a narrow gap and the first breath of air that had not moved in decades. Cassian stood by the door, rigid. Mrs. Veyr had come silently to the corridor and now watched with one hand at her throat. Lenora found this. Or made it. She was clever with more than music. Elara held the lamp inside the opening. A stair descended into darkness between walls of raw stone. On the left wall, scratched at shoulder height, was a line of musical notation. Not decoration. Direction. Cassian's voice came low behind her. Elara. She turned. It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his mouth might have moved her under different circumstances. Here, it had to pass through the same test as every other beautiful thing in Veyr House. Is that a warning or a request? Both. Then I hear both. I am still going down. She took chalk from her case and marked the panel, the floor, the wall. She tied one end of red conservation tape to the piano leg and clipped the other to her belt. Romance taught many foolish lessons about surrender. Archives taught better ones about returning by a known path. Lenora's melody had opened the way. Elara would not waste the witness. The stair behind the music room descended at an angle that made no architectural sense. It should have met the cellar wall within 20 steps. Instead, it continued down through damp stone, past old candle niches, past nail marks, past initials scratched by women who had counted their way through darkness. Elara moved carefully, left hand on the wall, right hand holding the lamp. Every 10 steps, she marked the stone with chalk and read aloud the initials she found.
I-V-M-E-L-A-H-V.
Behind her, Cassian followed at a distance she had set. He carried no lamp bright enough to overtake hers. That mattered too, though she would not let gratitude become fog. The lower they went, the more the house seemed to listen. Floorboards groaned above them, though they were far below the main level. Water ticked somewhere inside the walls. Once, a whisper moved past Elara's ear in a voice too old to belong to anyone living. Turn back. Elara stopped, opened her notebook, and wrote the words down. Even threats become evidence. Cassian made a sound behind her, almost a laugh, almost pain. At the bottom of the stair was an iron door, marked not with the Veyr crest, but with 6 small inlays. Prayer book, ledger, music note, physician's case, bookbinding needle, portrait frame. The women had not left a trail. They had built a lock.
The iron door opened when Elara touched the 6 symbols in the order the women had appeared. The lower archive breathed out darkness, cold, and the red mineral smell of sealed earth. The room beyond was vast. Not a cellar, a buried library. Shelves rose in rings around a central table of black stone. Every volume had a red spine. Every spine bore a name. Not categories, not household divisions. Names. Isolde Veyr, Maud Ellicott, Lenora Ashe, Sabine Hale, Annika Reed, Helena Veyr, Clara Moss, Beatrice Wyn, Ruth Fenn, Amabel Sayer. Names Elara knew. Names she had only glimpsed. Names no official family tree admitted had ever touched Veyr House. For one breath, awe overtook anger. The women had done more than survive in fragments. They had made a counter-archive under the feet of the family that erased them. They had turned secrecy into storage. They had trusted competence in the future. Then Elara saw the modern dust patterns, the clear path from door to table, the recent candle stubs, the place where a hand had lifted Helena's volume and returned it incorrectly. She turned to Cassian.
You knew.
He did not lie. That was something. It was also far too late.
Yes.
The lower archive, with all its women's names, seemed to wait for what Elara would do with the word. Elara did not shout. Shouting would have given Cassian drama, and she was done giving Veyr men rooms arranged around their feelings. She walked to the central table, opened her notebook, and began recording what his silence had cost the investigation. Lower archive concealed, despite full access contract. Named records withheld. Known danger not disclosed. Evidence of women's erasure kept under private family control. Possible obstruction of legal claims. Each line was a blade, because each line was accurate. I was afraid the old protections would wake. They were already awake. I kept these records from being burned, and kept them from being witnessed. His face changed at that. Not anger. Recognition. Elara almost hated him for making recognition look beautiful, for standing in a room full of women's names and still being someone her body remembered from candlelight and restraint. That was why judgment mattered. Attraction could not be allowed to vote on evidence. She pulled Helena's volume from the shelf, then Maud's, Lenora's, Sabine's. Inside each, the record was not complete, but deliberate. Fragments, copies, maps, statements, warnings. Helena's volume contained empty spaces where papers had been removed. Who removed these? Cassian's silence answered again. The betrayal was not that he was cursed. It was that he had made himself curator, judge, and locked door, then called it protection. At the black stone table, Elara laid out the evidence she had gathered from women who had never been permitted to meet. Isolde's covenant, Maud's arithmetic, Lenora's music, Sabine's diagnosis, Mrs. Vale's cipher cloth, Helena's damaged portrait notes. Together they formed something stronger than accusation. They formed continuity. You said there were people who would have destroyed these records.
There were.
Name them. Cassian looked toward the shelves where generations of Veyr harm had been catalogued by the people harmed.
Trustees. Cousins. Solicitors. My father. Men who believed the house should remain whole at any price.
And after they were gone? No answer.
You inherited the door and kept standing in it. The words moved through the lower archive like a verdict the room had been waiting to hear aloud. Somewhere in the shelves, a book fell flat with a crack of leather.
I did not know how to end it. That is different from not knowing it had to end.
His grief filled the space between them. Elara let it exist. She did not step forward to manage it, did not turn it into a task for herself, did not make his remorse the center of a room built by women who had already paid too much for Veyr men's transformations. I am ending my contract. The private one. The work continues. For the first time since she arrived, Cassian looked afraid of her. Not because the house might hurt her, but because she might be right. Elara worked quickly. She copied index pages, photographed shelf marks, sealed the volumes she had opened, and logged every action in duplicate. Betrayal did not excuse sloppy chain of custody. If anything, it made discipline more important. Cassian stood back. When a shelf groaned and one of the old locks snapped shut, he lifted his hand, then lowered it again. Open it. If I command too much down here, the house will know where you are. It already knows. Open it. He did. The lock yielded. He swayed, but remained upright. She did not thank him. The action was necessary, not redemptive. At the door, Elara removed the Veyr contract from her case. Across the bottom, beneath Cassian's signature, she wrote, "Suspension invoked, material non-disclosure, and concealed archival spaces." Then she signed and dated it.
You are leaving?
Yes.
Will you take guards?
I will take my copies, my notes, Mrs. Vale's testimony if she chooses to give it, and every legal avenue you should have used before I arrived. His face closed around the hurt. He did not ask her to stay. That was wise. It was not enough. Elara climbed the stair with the archive's first true map under her coat, and the taste of grief like iron at the back of her throat. Veyr House did not want Elara to leave. The front hall stretched longer than it had been. Doorways repeated. The grand staircase turned back on itself in a way stairs should not. Wind pressed through invisible cracks, carrying whispers in voices that wore authority like a borrowed coat. You signed. You entered. You owe. Elara stopped beneath the chandelier and took out the arrival contract. Her own amendments were there in black ink, countersigned by Cassian Veyr. Right to suspend. Right to remove copies. Right to notify authorities. The house had been bound by its master's signature, and signatures were a language it understood. Invitation revoked. Custody denied. Passage reserved under Clause 7. The floor shuddered. The front door remained shut. Cassian emerged from the old wing, pale enough to seem almost transparent in the lamplight. The house gathered around him, waiting for command. Elara saw the temptation in the air itself. The curse wanted him to close the door, to call it safety, to make control feel merciful. He did not.
Open.
The door flew wide. Rain roared in. The house screamed through every lock. Elara looked at him once. Not forgiveness, not hatred. A record of what he had chosen when the old power reached for his hand.
That is the beginning, not the end.
Then she walked out. Rain hit Elara hard enough to sting. The gravel path shone black under the gate lamps. Behind her, Veyr House loomed, with all its windows dark, as if it had shut its eyes against the insult of her departure. Mrs. Vale waited at the gatehouse in a heavy coat, her hair unpinned by the weather. She carried a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Lady Helena left instructions. If an archivist ever came out angry and alive, I was to give her this. Elara accepted the parcel with both hands. It was heavier than paper alone. Inside the oilcloth, beneath twine and wax, was a letter addressed not by name, but by profession. To the woman who knows a record is not dead because a man calls it closed. Elara's throat tightened. She did not open it in the rain. Some witnesses deserved a dry table and steady light.
Will you be safe here?
Safer if you make noise outside the walls. Elara looked back once more. In an upper window, Cassian stood without lamp or gesture. He did not call to her. He did not send a voice into her mind. He did not make grief into a leash. That was the bare minimum a man with power owed a woman leaving him. Elara turned toward Blackmere. Under her coat, Helena's parcel pressed against the crimson archive map like a second heartbeat. The Blackmere Public Records Office opened at 9. Elara was waiting at 8:30 with damp hair, 2 document cases, a witness parcel, and the expression of a woman who had slept badly and decided that sleep could apologize later. Public rooms had their own kind of magic, not the romance of candlelight or locked doors, but counters, stamps, clerks, receipt numbers,
and the blessed indignity of procedure. Veyr House could distort corridors. It could not easily distort a preservation notice filed in triplicate before a bored county registrar. Elara submitted formal notice of suspected estate record concealment, potential fraudulent title transfer, and risk of destruction or removal of archival evidence. She attached copies, not originals. She named Veyr House. She named Cassian. She named the hidden women wherever she had full names, and initials where the proof remained incomplete.
This is quite serious.
Yes. The Veyrs are an old family. That is one of the problems. By noon, the notice had a file number. By 1, certified copies were in the hands of a solicitor unaffiliated with the Veyr estate. By 2, Elara had rented a room above a bakery, spread Helena's parcel across the table, and pinned the first map of claims to the wall. Grief remained. So did longing. Neither was invited to hold the pen. The town records were less elegant than the Veyr archive, and far more honest. Their paper was cheap. Their ink faded badly. Their clerks made mistakes, crossed them out, initialed them, and moved on. Elara loved them for that. Ordinary imperfection was harder to weaponize than aristocratic polish. She laid Maud Ellicott's ledger dates beside parish notices, land tax entries, apprenticeship records, and burial registers. The pattern emerged by late afternoon. The Veyr estate's legal wholeness depended on women disappearing at precise moments. Caroline Mott's inherited pasture became Veyr grazing land after a marriage settlement omitted her surviving sister. Ruth Fenn's cottage row passed into Veyr hands after her death date was moved earlier by 6 months. Lenora Ash's child, recorded elsewhere under a guardian surname, had a claim not to Veyr title itself, but to compensation tied to performance contracts and witness suppression. Elara drew lines in red pencil. Not dramatic lines, legal lines. Claim to deed. Deed to forged consent. Forged consent to sealed record. Sealed record to living family. On the edge of the map, she wrote, "Justice must not collapse into romance." It was not a note for a court. It was for herself. Cassian might be suffering. Cassian might be changing. Cassian might even be necessary to break the red custody. But the map did not bend toward his redemption. It bent toward the people the estate had used, named, renamed, and used again. Helena's letter sent Elara to a lane behind the old fish market, where the remains of Annika Reed's bindery leaned between a cooper's shop and a wall of nettles. The sign had long since fallen. Inside, the air smelled of dust, paste, and rain through broken slate. Annika Reed had been listed in Veyr records as a supplier of devotional bindings. In town records, she was something more interesting. Bookbinder, stationer, widow, ratepayer, and defendant in 3 nuisance complaints for refusing to surrender client papers without written authority. Elara admired her immediately.
Beneath a collapsed workbench, wrapped in waxed cloth and hidden inside a drawer with a false bottom, she found Annika's pattern book. Not decorative patterns, spine structures, thread roots, hollow compartments, shelf mark codes, the physical grammar of the Crimson Archive. Annika had drawn Veyr House as shelves, not rooms. Chapel prayer books linked to legal covenants, music folios linked to stair mechanisms, medical notes linked to threshold rules, portrait backs linked to final locks. In the back of the book, a page had been cut into 3 narrow strips and stitched back with red thread. Elara lifted the first strip and found part of a legal clause. The second strip named the act required. The third named the cost. The red custody could be surrendered only by the heir, in public witness, with every hidden woman's record credited as source. Annika had not merely hidden evidence. She had built instructions for dismantling power. The bindery cellar was low enough that Elara had to stoop. Water had seeped through one wall, but the central storage chest remained dry, raised on bricks and sealed with pitch. Annika's initials marked the lid, not as ownership, but as warning. Someone had planned for damp, theft, and fear. Inside were sample spines, each dyed a different shade of red. Crimson for witness statements, madder for medical evidence, rust for legal fraud, wine for family correspondence. At the bottom lay a folded sheet in Helena Veyr's hand. Helena had written to Annika, though they had lived generations apart. Not literally, not impossibly, but through the archive's chain of women. Helena addressed the future keeper of the bindery instructions and added what she had learned from Cassian's father. "The house feeds not only on blood," Helena wrote. "It feeds on custody. Remove custody, and hunger loses its law." Elara assembled the surrender clause on the cellar floor. Isolde had supplied the consent objection. Maud, the proof of fraudulent inheritance. Lenora, the witness condition. Sabine, the medical distinction between hunger and choice. Annika, the physical map. Helena, the final legal language. Each woman had held one piece because no one woman had been allowed to hold the whole. The structure was heartbreaking. It was also brilliant. Elara understood then that Cassian could not be comforted out of the curse. He could not be kissed out of it, pitied out of it, forgiven out of it. He had to sign away the thing that made him master, and she would not ask privately. Maud's referenced solicitor's box had been misfiled under maritime disputes, which told Elara 2 things. First, someone had tried to bury it among dull records. Second, the person had underestimated how much Elara respected dull records. The box was stored in a municipal archive room behind the old solicitor's office, now administered by the town. Its metal corners were rusted. Its label had been overwritten twice. Inside, wrapped in cheap blue paper, were copies Maud Ellicott had made before her dismissal. Marriage settlements with omitted clauses, letters from daughters protesting their removal, a receipt for red wax ordered in quantities no household needed, a witness list for a chapel ceremony that included Lenora Ash's name, crossed out in the final version, but present in Maud's copy. At the bottom lay a note in Maud's hand. If they say these women were confused, remember who balanced the books. Elara laughed once, quietly, then pressed her fingers to the page in respect, without touching the ink. Maud's motive had not been romance, revenge, or melodrama. It had been accuracy. Accuracy, in a corrupt house, was rebellion. By evening, Elara had notarized copies, a second witness statement from the town archivist, and enough corroborating material to make the Veyr estate legally vulnerable for the first time in generations. The public process was slower than a curse. It was also harder to enchant.
Elara's rented room above the bakery became a war room of paper. Brown envelopes, string, court forms, genealogical charts, and cups of tea gone cold. The smell of bread rose through the floorboards at dawn, warm and ordinary, as if the world insisted that not every room had to be haunted to matter. She traced descendants carefully. No dramatic announcements. No midnight knocks. No turning living people into props for a Gothic revelation. She sent letters through solicitors with copies of evidence, explanations of uncertainty, and the option to decline involvement. From Maud's omitted claimants came a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Mott, who arrived with a folder of family stories and a spine like a steel ruler. From Lenora Ash's line came Mara Bell, a choir director who had inherited a song no one in her family understood. From Sabine's papers came Dr. Priya Hale, a distant relative and medical historian, who read the notes once and said, with quiet fury, that Sabine had known exactly what she was documenting. These women did not enter the story as symbols. They entered as stakeholders. They asked practical questions. Who controlled the originals? What legal remedies existed? Would the archive be public? Would the Veyr name remain on records it had corrupted? Elara answered what she could and admitted what she could not. Competence did not require omniscience. It required honesty and a plan. Together, they prepared to return. Cassian's letter arrived without seal, scent, or theatrical timing. It came by ordinary courier in a plain envelope addressed in his careful hand. Elara let it sit on the table until every other task had been completed for the evening. Then she opened it with a paper knife, not because she was angry enough to be dramatic, but because clean cuts preserved evidence.
Elara, I am not writing to ask you back.
She stopped there longer than she expected. The letter did what apologies rarely did well. It named the act without varnish. I concealed the lower archive. I let my fear decide what you were allowed to know. I confused preservation with authority because authority was what the curse taught me to call survival. You owe me nothing. If you return, let it be for the records, the witnesses, and the end of the Red custody, not for me. Enclosed were keys, shelf indexes, and a signed preliminary declaration surrendering any claim to restrict independent review. Not enough. Important. Elara read the letter twice. The tenderness in her did not vanish. It moved carefully, like a hand near flame. She allowed herself to feel the ache of what he might become without confusing it with what he had done. She did not write back that night. Instead, she verified the keys against Anika's pattern book, copied Cassian's declaration, and added it to the legal bundle marked conditional cooperation. Even longing could be filed properly. The courthouse in Blackmere was small, damp, and profoundly unimpressed by aristocratic tragedy. Its steps were worn hollow in the center. Its brass rail was polished by ordinary hands. Elara stood there with Evelyn Mott, Mara Bell, Dr. Priya Hale, the town archivist, Mrs. Vale's preliminary statement, and a solicitor who had no family connection to Veyr House and a useful dislike of sealed rooms. They obtained a preservation order and supervised access authority for records relevant to disputed claims. The language was bureaucratic. Elara could have kissed the paper for its lack of poetry. No curse liked witnesses. No bloodline spell enjoyed a court stamp. No inherited monster of a house wanted women arriving together with copies, legal standing, and sensible shoes. Evelyn Mott tucked the order into her leather bag.
My grandmother used to say the Veyrs could make a person feel rude for asking what was theirs. Then we will be rude with documentation.
Mara Bell brought Lenora's inherited song, written from memory by 3 generations. Dr. Hale brought medical gloves and a mind ready to distinguish symptom from excuse. The town archivist brought empty boxes. Elara brought the map. What she did not bring was surrender. If she returned to Veyr House, it would be with witnesses, copies, and legal authority. It would not be because a lonely man had written beautifully. It would be because hidden women had built a door and asked the living to open it. The road to Veyr House looked different in a convoy. 1 motor car could be swallowed by fog and rumor. 3 made a statement. The solicitor sat in the first with the preservation order. Evelyn and Mara sat in the second, speaking quietly over a folder of names. Dr. Hale rode with Elara, one hand steady on Sabine's copied notes. Rain threatened, but did not fall. The boundary stones appeared through the coastal mist, and this time Elara asked the driver to stop for everyone. They stood before the lichen-marked initials, while Mara hummed the first line of Lenora's tune. The air changed, not softened, attended. Elara read the initials aloud, then the full names where she knew them.
Isolde Veyr, Maud Ellicott, Lenora Ashe, Sabine Hale, Anika Reed, Helena Veyr.
The names did not vanish into the mist. They seemed to settle on the road, on the wet stone, on the shoulders of the people who had chosen to carry them. Elara had spent years with records that reduced lives to signatures, initials, and corrected spellings. This was different. Here, a name was not a label. It was an act of return. Evelyn Mott opened her folder and removed a copy of the altered settlement that had cost her family land. She did not cry. She looked at the initials as though looking at a door that had been painted over and said, very quietly, that her grandmother had always kept a spare key in every coat. Mara answered that Lenora's descendants had kept a song for the same reason. Dr. Hale said Sabine had kept notes because medicine without record was only rumor with a kind face. Elara listened and did not hurry them. Legal authority had brought them to the gate. Memory would help them cross it without becoming what the house expected, frightened petitioners asking old power for permission. Dr. Hale added Sabine's name again, softly, with a strange intimacy of bloodline and scholarship. Evelyn touched the stone-marked Emmy, though Maud was not her ancestor by blood. Accuracy had its own kinship. Elara looked toward the house. The upper windows flashed with a dull red reflection, as if something inside had opened its eyes. She felt fear. She also felt the line of people beside her. That was the difference between walking into a secret and walking into a reckoning. She returned by choice, and she did not return alone. Cassian waited at the gate beneath a black umbrella he did not seem to need for rain. It was not raining. The umbrella was for the thin, cold daylight pressing through the clouds. He looked diminished in it, not romantically ruined, not prettily doomed, but physically weakened by the truth leaving his house. Elara stepped from the car with a legal order in one hand and Anika's pattern book in the other.
Mr. Veyr.
Something in his face tightened at the formality. He accepted it.
Ms. Wyn. I am here under preservation authority, with witnesses, independent copies, and claimants' representatives. You will not direct access. You will not determine which names are read. You will not close a room unless I instruct it for safety. Agreed.
His answer came without hesitation. That did not repair what had broken. It did establish the first new term. Evelyn Mott watched him with frank dislike. Mara Bell studied the house rather than the man. Dr. Hale looked at Cassian as a patient might be looked at by a doctor who had read the chart and refused to confuse illness with innocence. Cassian lowered his head to them.
I cannot undo what my house took. I will not ask you to soften what you came to do.
No one rushed to comfort him. That restraint belonged to the witnesses too. Evelyn's expression did not change. Mara's fingers tightened around Lenora's music. Dr. Hale watched the small tremor at Cassian's jaw and made no move to turn a symptom into sentiment. The moment was not cruel. It was clean. Elara felt the old pull of him even then, perhaps because he had finally stopped trying to stand between the women and the door. But longing, she had learned, was not a commandment. It was weather. You could notice it, respect its force, and still refuse to build your legal strategy around rain. The gate opened without his hand moving. Elara glanced at him.
Did you command it? No. I surrendered the gate last night.
A small thing. A real thing. The party crossed the threshold, and in the walls of Veyr House, old heirs woke hungry. Great Hall had been rearranged before they arrived, not by Cassian's taste, but by Elara's instructions sent through Mrs. Vale at dawn. The long table stood beneath the staircase. On it were 6 document rests, 6 lamps, 6 name cards, and enough space for witnesses to stand on both sides. The portraits of Veyr men remained on the walls because history did not become safer when flattering evidence was removed. Elara placed Isolde's covenant on the first rest, Maud's ledger copies on the second, Lenora's annotated music on the third, Sabine's medical notes on the fourth, Anika's pattern book on the fifth, Helena's letter on the sixth. Each woman had a place. Each source had a chain. Each fragment would be credited before the heir spoke a word. The house disliked this order. The chandelier trembled. A draft moved against the direction of every window. Somewhere behind the walls, locks clicked in agitation, seeking a master who no longer answered as quickly as they wished. Cassian stood at the end of the table with no signet ring on his hand. That absence mattered. He had removed the symbol before entering the room. Elara noted it without rewarding it.
We proceed by record, not by family preference, not by legend, not by pain.
The solicitor opened a fresh register. The town archivist set down a receipt book. Mrs. Veyr placed the house keys in a shallow porcelain dish at the center of the table, where everyone could see them. The sound they made was small, almost domestic, but it moved through the hall like a bell. For generations, those keys had traveled at the waist of servants, in the pockets of heirs, under pillows, inside locked drawers. Now they lay between witnesses, stripped of intimacy and made procedural. Elara let the room sit with that. Ceremony did not have to be ornate to be powerful. Sometimes it was simply the act of refusing to let secrecy hurry. She walked the witnesses through the sequence before Cassian touched the surrender clause. First, proof of origin, then proof of alteration, then proof of witness suppression, then medical context, then physical map, then final instruction. Each step answered a habit the house had relied on: confusion, awe, pity, fatigue, fear. Elara named the steps not because the room lacked intelligence, but because clarity was a form of protection.
If the house interrupts, we pause only to preserve life and evidence. We do not skip names. We do not let noise decide order.
The town archivist nodded and wrote that sentence into the register. A practical immortality, Elara thought. Not blood, not myth. Ink witnessed by people who had no reason to flatter the dead. Evelyn, Mara, Dr. Hale, Mrs. Vale, the solicitor, and the town archivist took their places. The living gathered around the dead, not to consume their suffering, but to complete their work. The surrender clause had been assembled on heavy paper, each section marked by its source. Isolde's consent objection formed the opening. Maud's proof of fraudulent inheritance established material harm. Lenora's witness condition required public speech. Sabine's diagnosis removed hunger as excuse. Anita's binding map proved the archive had been deliberately constructed as a counter-record. Helena's final language named the Red Custody as a legal authority that could be renounced. Cassian took the page. His hands shook once, then steadied.
I, Cassian Veyr, current heir of Veyr House, acknowledge that the Red Custody has preserved my life, property, and authority through concealment, false consent, and the erasure of women from legal and family record.
The words cost him more because they were plain. A grander confession might have hidden him inside drama. This one left him standing in the exact shape of his benefit. Elara watched the witnesses as he spoke. Evelyn's mouth tightened at property. Mara closed her eyes at false consent. Dr. Hale looked down at Sabine's notes, perhaps thinking of every patient whose fear had once been called nerves because the truth embarrassed someone powerful. The hall darkened, not from weather, from attention. The old portrait seemed to inhale.
I acknowledge Isolde Veyr, whose covenant preserved the first objection. Maud Ellicott, whose ledgers preserved the omitted heirs. Lenora Ashe, whose music preserved witness against false ritual. Sabine Hale, whose medical notes preserved the distinction between hunger and choice. Anika Reed, whose bindings preserved the path. Helena Veyr, whose final letter preserved the surrender.
At each name, the corresponding lamp burned brighter. Elara watched Cassian carefully. Not tenderly yet, carefully. The clause was not performance if he accepted its cost. It was only performance if he expected the room to admire his pain more than the women's evidence.
I renounce command over locks, thresholds, sealed rooms, disputed titles, household contracts, and private custody of the archive.
The house struck the doors like a fist.
Continue.
Cassian looked at her then, and for one dangerous heartbeat the hall held all the old romantic temptations. The wounded man, the woman he wanted, the house threatening both, the easy shape of a private promise made under pressure. Elara did not step into that shape. She pointed to the next line of the clause.
To whom do you surrender custody?
He lowered his eyes to the page.
To independent legal review, to the living claimants named by evidence, to the public archive established from these records, and to no Veyr heir without their consent.
Elara did not look away from the witnesses when it happened. The old instinct of a Gothic house was to pull every eye toward the powerful man in distress, to make the room orbit his suffering until the women's evidence became scenery again. She resisted that gravity, deliberately. Isolde's covenant remained first on the table. Maud's ledger remained open. Lenora's music continued to tremble under Mara's fingertips. Sabine's notes were weighted under glass. Anika's pattern book held its place. Helena's final letter waited, sealed until the names had been honored. Cassian saw where Elara was looking. To his credit, he followed her gaze, not toward his own shaking hands, but toward the documents that had made surrender possible. The solicitor placed the signing board before Cassian. The pen was ordinary. Elara had insisted on that too. No ancestral quill, no blood point, no ceremonial blade. The Red Custody had hidden itself inside legal ritual for centuries. It would be surrendered with ink anyone could audit. Cassian looked at the page, then at Elara.
If I sign, the house may try to take back what it gave me. Yes. I may not survive as I have been. Yes.
She did not soften the terms. She did not say she would save him. She did not offer her love as cushion for consequence. The old romance would have asked her to. This story would not. Cassian nodded once. Then he signed. The effect was immediate and terrible. Every lock in Veyr House opened at once. Doors slammed wide. The chandelier flared, then went dark. Cassian gasped and gripped the table as the shadow that had always clung to him tore loose in long red threads of light. Elara stepped forward only far enough to keep the ink from spilling across the clause. Dr. Hale moved to Cassian's side with professional speed.
Sit, that is medical instruction, not absolution.
Cassian gave a breathless sound that might have been laughter if it had not hurt so much. He sat. The signed surrender passed from Cassian to the solicitor to the witnesses, from private curse into public record. Only after the last witness initialed the page did Elara allow herself to look fully at Cassian. He was breathing hard, eyes closed, one hand clenched around the edge of the chair as though the house had tried to drag him backward through his own bones. Dr. Hale checked his pulse with brisk care. No one called him brave. No one called him forgiven. The room gave him something rarer and less flattering, acknowledgement that he had done the necessary thing, and that necessity was not romance. Cassian opened his eyes and did not search first for Elara's softness. He looked at the signed page.
File it.
The solicitor did. Then the town archivist made the first accession entry while the hall still trembled. Date, time, location, witnesses present, condition of document, chain of custody transferred from private estate to supervised public authority pending full legal review. The language was dry enough to make the curse seem almost foolish for having feared it. Yet every word bit into the old spell. The Red Custody had wrapped itself in law, made honest, now unwrapped it. Elara signed as archival investigator. Evelyn signed as claimant representative. Mara signed as descendant witness. Dr. Hale signed as medical reviewer. Mrs. Vale signed as household witness. Cassian signed last, no title after his name. The portrait corridor waited with its faces still turned to the wall. Elara led the procession, they're carrying the list of names. No music accompanied them at first. Then Maribel began to hum Lenora's melody, not as performance, but as witness. The notes moved along the corridor and found every hidden scene. One by one the portrait shifted, not spinning theatrically, not leading from hooks, but turning with the slow reluctance of a house losing an argument it had rehearsed for centuries. Elara read the names she had full authority to read. Isolde Veyr, Maud Ellicott, Lenora Ashe, Sabine Hale, Anika Reed, Helena Veyr, Clara Moss, Beatrice Wyn, Caroline Mott, Ruth Wyn, Annabelle Sayre. Others followed where records allowed. Where evidence remained incomplete, Elara named the uncertainty instead of inventing comfort.
Unknown woman recorded as a yes in the winter ledger. Witness here until her full name is restored.
Evelyn Mott read her family names with a voice that trembled but did not break. Dr. Hale read Sabine's closing note. Mrs. Vale read the names of servants her grandmother had spoken of in whispers. Mara stopped time long enough to read Lenora's line in full. When they call us entertainment, let the walls learn our tune. Her voice cracked on the final word, and then she sang a line instead of speaking it. The melody traveled through the corridor differently now. No longer a key still into a useless song, but a testimony restored to its own form. At Maud's portrait, Evelyn placed a corrected copy of the ledger entry beneath the frame. She did not know whether Maud would have liked ceremony. She suspected Maud would have preferred an accurate sum. So Evelyn read the corrected total out, then the names it concealed. Elara watched the gesture and felt the deep satisfaction of a record becoming exact after 200 years of distortion. Dr. Hale stood beneath Sabine's portrait and read one paragraph in the physician's own words. The disease explains appetite. It does not explain entitlement. In the corridor, the sentence sounded less like judgment than diagnosis finally delivered to the proper patient. Cassian bowed his head, but Sabine's record did not require his reaction to matter. It mattered because it was true. Mrs. Veyr approached the section where servants' portraits had never been hung. There were blank rectangles on the wall, paler than surrounding paper. Spaces where frames might have been flavor had counted as lineage. She read Claire Moss and Beatrice went into those blank places. The wall answered with a faint outline, not full faces, not convenient closure, but enough to admit absence had been made, not found. The corridor filled with women who had changed the plot by refusing to disappear neatly. Brief came, but not as decoration. It came as recognition with work still attached. At the end of the hall, the red thread across Helena's painted mouth loosened. The thread fell from Helen Veyr's portrait in a single red line. It landed at Elara's feet. Behind the canvas, a final compartment opened with a soft click of a book closing. Elara removed the folded page inside. Helena's hand was steady, but the ink had blotted twice, as though written in haste or tears. If this is read aloud, Helena had written, then my son has chosen to give up mastery, and the women have been named as witnesses. Do not let the house punish the living for what the dead demanded. Beneath the letter was a final instruction. Open the lower archive from the inside and outside at once. Custody cannot survive shared access. The house heard her read it. The walls bucked. Plaster cracked along the ceiling. Somewhere below, shelves streamed against the brackets. Cassian, pale and unsteady, reached for the wall.
The lower archive is sealing. No, it is losing custody.
She folded Helena's letter once, carefully, and placed it in the evidence sleeve. Even in urgency, especially in urgency, the record deserved care. Helena had spent her life inside a house that trained women to hide proof in hems, spines, cupboards, and the backs of portraits. Elara would not repay that labor by waving the final instruction like a prop in a storm. For one brief moment, she imagined Helena writing it, perhaps knowing her son would be judged by someone she would never meet. The thought hurt. Then it became useful. Helena had not asked the future for pity. She had asked for execution. She turned to the others. No panic. No romantic chaos. Instructions.
Mrs. Vale, front keys. Archivist bell boxes. Dr. Hale, keep Mr. Veyr upright if he can be useful and seated if he cannot. Evelyn, stay with the legal copies. Mar, keep singing if you can.
It was not the speech a frightened house wanted from a heroine. No trembling appeal to love. No bargain with darkness. No promise that she would trade herself for the records or the man for the women. Elara gave assignments because assignments saved lives. She gave assignments because everyone in the archive had been denied the dignity of practical help when it mattered. She would not repeat that failure in a more romantic voice. Mar's voice rose, shaking but present. Lenora's melody threaded the corridor. Helena's portrait, finally unbound, looked past them toward the lower stair. Even now, the hidden women were not done saving the living. The lower archive had become a storm of paper, dust, and red light. Shelves leaned but did not fall. Locks opened and shut with frantic indecision, as if the house could not remember whether it owned the records anymore. Elara entered with Anita's pattern book open in one hand and the preservation priority list in the other. She did not try to save everything first. Panic loved sentimentality. Archives required tria.
Name witness volumes first, then indexes, then title links. Do not separate loose pages from their shelf cards.
The priority list had been built from the women's own design. It sold first because origin mattered. Maud second because property harm had living consequences. Lenore third because witness suppression made every later lie easier. Sabine fourth because the curse would always try to hide behind appetite. Anita fifth because without the map, the archive could be made mysterious again. Helena sixth because the last block belonged to the woman who had chosen truth against her own house. Cassian came down behind Dr. Hale, moving like a man walking after a fever. He reached for a buckling shelf, then looked to Elara.
Permission.
The word was quiet, almost lost in the noise. It mattered anyway.
Hold that stack until Mar clears the boxes.
He obeyed under her direction, no longer master of the room. Only one more pair of hands in a crisis he had helped create and finally chosen to end. Evelyn secured Maud's ledgers. Mara packed Lenora's music while still humming through tears. Mrs. Vale found Helena's missing letters behind a panel no Veyr had known to search because it opened with a housekeeper's mending needle. The solicitor, to his credit, did not try to be heroic. He numbered boxes, checked seals, and shouted receipt marks over the noise. The town archivist raised a crate with one knee and kept writing as dust settled in her hair. Dr. Hale made Cassian sit twice and stand once, according to usefulness rather than masculine pride. In another story, chaos might have lured everyone into motion. Elara saw individuals' tasks, hands, evidence. That was how a rescue became a transfer instead of a spectacle. When the last priority box crossed the threshold, the red light snapped. The archive did not collapse into rubble. It exhaled. Shelves settled. Locks fell open and stayed open. The house had lost the right to decide what survived. Dawn found them at the ruined doorway between the old wing and the east garden. Rain had ended. The sea beyond the cliff shone clear under a thin line of light. Veyr House looked smaller, though no stone had moved. Power often did, once named correctly. Cassian sat on the threshold step with Dr. Hale's coat around his shoulders and no shadow moving independently at his feet. He looked younger in one way, older in another. Mortal was not the right word yet. Neither was monster. He was a man after surrender, which is to say a man without the old excuse available. Elara stood beside the stacked record boxes, checking labels against her list. Even now, especially now. Her hands shook only after the final seal was logged. She allowed the tremor then, privately, with a pencil still between her fingers. The body, unlike the law, did not care whether danger had been handled competently. It wanted to remember the shaking floor, the red light, Cassian's face when the custody tore out of him, Mara singing through dust, Evelyn carrying Maud's ledger as if it were both evidence and ancestor. Elara breathed until the tremor passed. Then she wrote one more note in the margin. Transfer witness. Romance not material to custody. It was a severe sentence. It steadied her.
You should rest. I will rest after the chain of custody is secure.
A faint smile touched his mouth and vanished.
Of course.
Silence settled. Not empty, but changed. The longing between them remained. It had survived anger, distance, public witness, and consequence. That did not make it simple. It made it worth treating carefully.
There will be hearings, claims, restitution, public access disputes, people who praise your sacrifice because they prefer it to examine your benefit. I know. I will correct them. I hope you do.
He did not thank her for being hard on him. That would have made her discipline another service rendered for his growth. He simply accepted the future she described, public, tedious, expensive, and necessary. The tenderness that moved through Elara then was quieter than desire and more dangerous because it had evidence under it. She could imagine standing beside this version of him someday. She could not yet promise how close. It was the right answer because it did not ask her to become gentle where accuracy was needed. Witnesses had gone to the cars, and Mrs. Vale had taken Dr. Hale's instructions inside. Elara and Cassian stood alone at the threshold without being hidden. The door remained open behind them. That mattered. So did the daylight. So did sign surrender already on its way to town. Cassian did not reach for her.
May I ask one personal thing? You may ask. I may decline. Will you allow me to stand inside the archive when it opens? Not as owner, not as curator, as witness to what my name did.
Elara looked at him for a long moment. The man before her was still dangerous in the way wounded powerful men could be dangerous if praised too quickly. He was also changed in the only way that mattered, not by forgiveness, but by his relinquished control. She thought of the first night, his hands stopping before her coat. She thought of the locked library, his hunger named without selection. She thought of the lower archive, his fear becoming a date, and then the front door opening because he had finally refused to let the house use him against her. None of those moments canceled the reach. Together, they formed a narrower, more honest question, not whether he deserved a happy ending, but whether he could enter the work without owning it.
Yes, decide it. Not over it. Decide it.
Only then did Elara offer her hand. Cassian took it as though accepting a fragile document, not playing a prize. His fingers were cold, hers rain stained. There was no bite, no vow written in blood, no promise that love would settle every debt. There was only a door open behind them, and a future neither of them owned. Months later, the prison archive opening their sword and sword had once touched taxes, and now the back row. Its front room was bright, without the the walls were worn gray, the lamps were tight, the nameplates belonged to witnesses, not donors. Elara cataloged the first legend under the heading of Veyr House. Testimony, property, medicine, music, writing, correspondence. His soul side represented client cases, side transcripts. Maud's letters had but others see index. Lenore's melody could be heard through headphones, sung by Marla without the apple star. Sabine's notes were annotated by Dr. Hale. Anita's title was open to surrender. Helen's portrait, not unstitched, face evidence. Restitution had done, not perfectly, never perfectly, but these are review, claims were filed, and Veyr state no longer controlled the evidence and itself. The open was not peaceful, and old families referred to scandals to peaceful. It was specific. A wall display explained how marriage elements also society record Sabine's face never by claiming that women's abortion not the same power that. A living station, others still like before after Mar's sword and Sabine's line. Some visitors came through a man's rumor and left fire they arrived. Some came because their own families stories of evidence and careless answers. Elara watched other details, had sent understandings, and understood the archive had become more than illusion. It had become method. Cassian came twice a week. He signed documents without identifying He answered questions and asked and accepted silence or not. Sometimes he and Elara shared tea at courtyard clothing, were long had to breathe because no longer had to do justice work. Their closest room, ornaments, testimony, anyone receptacle. Cassian learned to wait while Elara did challenge. Elara with questions only still, and asked anyway required. He brought no roses, no jewelry, no dramatic verses briefly in the doorway. He brought corrected exits, signed letters months after 3 hours testimony. A cup of tea exactly strong enough to make her feel better than anything else. That was why he began because the archive opening. It had stopped asking to be a separate story. It had become one honest and mundane and Elara felt that she far more than session. The romance did not erase the archive. The archive made honest romance possible. On the first room, the official arrived, there was no pronouns. Elara's number, photographed, log it, and only allowed herself to red, not bare, darker, almost round edges, stamped with crest, she not 3 keys in the classroom. Cassian took the room, removed the transcript, Evelyn. He lived where Elara some inside some might be
Is it from the house? No.
Elara opened the parcel. Inside the single file wrapped in a mountain state, and Elara written no Wednesday again. If the curse arrives, they must know the house was not moving and learning next to the law. Beneath Elara was 20 page, was a long match. Reading the cut away, not scratch away, soul searcher, cut out cleanly, as if someone had removed only words, but the structure had never been. In the margin, everyone had 1 sentence, ran right. They talked this on but they did not speak to the artist. Elara pulled the tennis over, the clean word collected. She reached for a fresh dinosaur. Then we started the source. Summary of the archives. We felt like less. The red box. The next thing went, I found